Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to another episode of the Talk Room series of podcasts. Our goal is to explore how you can be your best self, even when faced with the challenges of relationship concerns, by leveraging the power of counseling and therapeutic support. I'm Ian, and today we're diving into an incredibly important topic surrounding low self-esteem. And for those people who have yet to see any of our previous podcasts, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Wendy. Wendy is a hugely experienced, fully accredited cognitive behavioral therapist, EMDR therapist, working in private practice, who's been involved in the whole world of mental health for well over 35 years now.
Thank you so much, Ian. And you are a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member, and also the founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. So, warm welcome to you, Ian.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about how to improve your self-esteem. So can we just start by a definition of what we actually mean when we use that phrase self-esteem?
Yes, certainly, Ian. So, self-esteem refers to our overall sense of our own value, worth, or confidence an individual holds about themselves. So it focuses on our beliefs about our abilities, our own self-respect, and even a sense of our own belonging. So if you have high self-esteem, you're much more likely to cope with challenges around change, just feeling more free, more able to contribute to conversations or situations, and also more likely to maintain a level of resilience in situations which we find difficult or challenging. So that's a good definition of self-esteem.
Hmm. Really helpful, Wendy. So thank you. Um, so really what we're saying, it's about belief in yourself. So to be open about your own thoughts, your own actions, but also to bounce back when going through difficult times as well. So what would we mean by low self-esteem?
Mm. Certainly, and I think it's very important to see the differences there. So, an example of low self-esteem is characterized by a negative self-concept, where, for example, individuals see themselves, they believe they're unworthy, inadequate, or just simply incapable. Often, an individual with low self-esteem has really harsh level of self-criticism, or maybe a fear of failure might be another one, and being more sensitive to any rejection that happens, or if you're criticized, more sensitive to responding badly to criticism. So low self-esteem can lead to all kinds of problems. For example, avoiding situations that they find challenging. It can make it difficult to form relationships, and it might contribute to mental health problems such as anxiety or depression, as some examples.
Really interesting. So thank you. And I wonder whether you can just give us some common causes for low self-esteem, according to what the research tells us.
Absolutely, Ian. Yes. And so um, now low self-esteem can have many different causes. And often it comes from a mix of personal relationships, your own experiences, and even our relationship with ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we view ourselves. And I'd just like to give some examples, if that's okay. So,
Please.
thank you. Thank you. So, a common one is our early life experience. So, for example, if your childhood has been full of negative experiences, for example, if you come from a family where as a child you've been criticized a lot, or maybe ignored, or simply not given enough love and support, these can lead you to feeling unworthy or not good enough. Another example of poor parenting is if the parents are overprotective or over strict.
Mm.
So either overprotective, they're sort of trying, or you're trying to control a child. So the child isn't left free to make their own mistakes and then sort of leads to self-doubt in their own abilities. Another example is bullying or teasing. So if you have an experience where either your siblings or parents or one parent or students at school tease a person in a certain way, examples are, just being mocked, being fun of, excluded, or even physically assaulted, of course,
Mm.
can, can lead to feelings of low self-esteem. And then another category is unrealistic expectations. So a common problem that I hear a lot about nowadays is people comparing. If you compare yourself to others, so if you spend a lot of time measuring yourself against other people, whether it's online, who seem more to you successful, attractive, or capable, can naturally lead you to feelings inferior about yourself. Or if you're too hard on yourself, if you put a lot of pressure on yourself to succeed, if you constantly set yourself perfectionist or impossible standards, you feel as though you must be perfect. Anything less than you've failed, that can really create a sense of fear of failure in you as well.
Mm.
Simple things like thinking negatively, getting you to sort of very rigid patterns of being very critical. So, a lot of people have a very critical inner voice, and that inner voice is always putting you down, always focusing on what's wrong with you, your flaws. That can really affect your self esteem. Another example of poor thinking is if you're sort of quite rigid in your thinking. It's called black and white thinking.
Mm.
So it's sort of very clear, it's very rigid, there's no sort of grey area and everything like that. You're either a success or a failure. And as you can see, that leads to feelings of worthlessness. A very common problem is it can be parenting, or it can be any experience of trauma or abuse. And obviously this could be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. And obviously these experiences, for whoever it was from, can really deeply affect how you feel about yourself and can lead to secondary problems such as shame and guilt, feeling of unworthiness as well. Um, and then also either whether you've ever felt neglected, being
Mm.
brought up, or even rejected.
Mm.
So either experience of your parents or another caregiver um, giving you in their way they interact with you a feeling of just simply not being wanted, or actually even physically being abandoned
Mm.
by people who should be looking after you, should be good care about you. That's another example. Unfortunately, our society and culture can actually contribute to low self-esteem. Classic at the moment is in the social media, you have these incredibly unrealistic beauty standards affecting both males and females as well. So if you're constantly looking at messages where people are posting, you know, impossibly perfectionist images of themselves or amazing lifestyles as well, it's very common that people, especially younger people, can feel that they're not actually measuring up.
Mm.
Discrimination or stigma. So being judged or again excluded because of things you can't change, your race, your gender, your class, your ability, or any other traits can obviously affect your self-esteem. And then the other area is life challenges. So if you've had a series of failures or setbacks, if you feel you haven't achieved your work objectives, if you dropped out of school, if you've got failed relationships or simply personal goals, that can actually make you feel as though you haven't succeeded to what you aspire to do. And another area is no fault of your own if you're actually chronically ill or you have some form of disability. So any of these kind of illnesses or health issues can make you feel different from other people,
Mm.
make you feel as though you're not achieving as much, so you're more limited, which can affect how you see yourself as well. And then the last one is just simply um, being in an environment which is not particularly positive. So, say at work, for example, if you're at work and the work culture or ethic is you don't really celebrate your personal achievements, you don't notice your strengths, you're actually constantly criticized or put down, or just nothing was said about you, that
mm,
can affect you as well. Or simply when you do accomplish something, nobody really recognizes it, sees it, you don't celebrate it yourself, and
mm,
therefore you dismiss things that you don't think are particularly, you've achieved. You always look on the negative side.
mm. That really is quite a list in terms of how these things can evolve. Um, so lots of different strategies that can cause low self-esteem. So as a therapist, what I'm wondering is how do you help people in therapy to work on that self-esteem?
Mm. Well, yes, good question, Ian, there. Very good question. And there's a range of therapies that I want to talk about, and each one has a sort of different contribution. Um, this is just an example of some strategies. Obviously, there's a lot more out there, and I just need to say it is important to focus on the individual needs of the situation, and what the person's presenting problems is. But
Mm,
here are just some examples. So the first one I want to give an example from is from cognitive behavior therapy, because that is one of my specialities. And one key thing that CBT focuses in on really looking at a person's thought patterns, what they're actually saying to themselves, the conversations they're having inside their heads, their beliefs, the pattern of thinking as well. And there's a type of belief called a core belief. And
mm,
what this really is, it's a very sort of deep rooted belief, often comes from childhood or from a sort of serious setback. And often you have beliefs such as an example is, I'm not good enough or I'm unlovable. They're very common beliefs, the core beliefs that people have. And how a CBT therapist might work with that. They might use a technique called a thought record. And the idea is to really look at situations where a person believes that they're inadequate. They have these beliefs that they're inadequate. And you guide them to actually write down the thoughts that they're having and actually look at evidence to challenge or contradict these beliefs.
mm,
So, again, if they're sort of looking at minimizing their achievements, get them to actually really write down and think about their achievements as well.
mm,
Another technique which I personally like a lot is actually logging positive data.
mm,
So here, ideally, the person does it on a regular basis, ideally daily, and they actually start to log evidence of positive qualities and examples of how they've behaved as if they've got high self-esteem. So situations which perhaps they've found difficult or challenging, but they have actually achieved a result and they've actually succeeded, to
mm,
actually write it down and really note it and sort of really celebrate that process as well. And sometimes if you have a core belief of I'm not good enough, another thing you can do is create a belief that you are good enough and look for evidence that you are good enough as well. So you sort of build up a sort of internal positive core belief and start to dismiss or disregard the evidence about the negative core belief.
mm,
It does take a long time to do that, but it is a worthwhile thing to do. Another example is called cognitive restructuring. And this is where people often have beliefs which they believe are true. They're very fixed and they're very rigid. So, I'm always failing would be a good example. I'm always failing. Um, and then it's perhaps writing it down or encouraging to think about it a different way. So an example of rather, I always fail, perhaps say something like, sometimes I might struggle with things,
mm,
but to remind myself there's many examples of where I have succeeded and these are the examples. Trying to soften the belief, make it softer rather than so rigid.
mm,
And then another way that CBT helps is something called behavioral experiments. This is where you change your behavior. And the idea is by changing your behavior, you change your belief. So, an example here is if you've got the belief, low self esteem belief that nobody likes me. So you encourage them to actually, and therefore, if nobody likes them, they actually don't initiate conversation or have any conversation with people, which actually reinforces the negative self-belief. So this time you perhaps give them some sort of mini challenge to maybe go up and say hello to people or initiate conversation very low key, maybe in a shop or something like that, fairly safe environment. And when they realize actually that they are getting a positive response, that obviously inevitably increases her self-esteem. So there's some examples from CBT.
Mm.
The next therapy that I really like is called ACT, and that stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And this is very interesting therapy. And one of the key areas of ACT is they kind of get you to look at having a different relationship with your thoughts and feelings. And this technique is called diffusion. And it's really, rather than challenging your negative thoughts, it's actually just sort of reminding yourself that it's just thoughts in your head. It doesn't actually mean anything. You're just telling yourself a conversation. So, for example, if a person is saying, I'm worthless, and they believe it, they have emotion there attached to their belief that they're worthless, ACT would actually encourage the person to say that I'm just noticing that I'm having a thought that I'm worthless.
Mm.
See, just saying that, but it's a little bit more distance and takes away some of the emotional power of the thought. So that's a very interesting one. I don't
Mm.
know what you feel about Ian, but I find it very interesting.
Mm. Mm.
Okay, good. And then ACT talks a lot about identifying values. And what that means is thinking about things that are important and meaningful to you, and actually sort of spending some time clarifying what that means. And the idea then is that they start doing actions which are in line with their values. So, one example of that, say if a person actually feels good about themselves when they're helping others and that helps their self esteem, encourage them to sort of act in that way. And that might be, for example, taking a volunteer job where they spend a lot of time helping others and they get positive reinforcement for that, and that helps them to feel good. They get a sense of purpose and accomplishment. And another skill from ACT is mindfulness, although mindfulness is present as a therapy on its own, but it's also part of ACT. And this is where you're really encouraging a person to really focus on the present moment. So, what actually happens, a lot of people ruminate about their past and they go on about their past failures, or they feel hopeless about their future. They feel as though they can't change their future and that things will never get better. But just by living in a day-to-day way and being curious about your experiences and your thoughts takes away some of the power of either negatively thinking about the past or the future.
Mm. Mm. Lots and lots of different ideas, lots of resources in there, Wendy. So thank you for sharing those. Are there other strategies? I mean, if that's not enough, are there other things that can be done?
Yes, there are. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to sort of explain a couple more therapies
Yeah, by all
I think
means.
really help. And so one of my favorites is called compassion focus therapy, or CFT for short. And this is really good for, identifying and noticing this inner critic we talked about earlier, this very harsh, negative inner critic thought. And one way of doing this is just understanding really how that inner critic developed in the first place. So actually, being curious about early life experiences, such as maybe, as we said before, critical parenting, and they sort of internalize that negative critical parenting talk. That might be understanding. And just by understanding that that's why they've got the inner critic can actually help them say, well, it's not me. It's not me. I'm not defective. It's actually come from a result of my past. And that's just
Mm.
being a little bit kinder about it as well.
Yeah.
And there's lots of skills about being more kind to yourself. Um, so you can actually help yourself to create an alternative voice, a warm, supportive inner voice as well. And there's many techniques about this. One is actually just writing to yourself in a different way, writing a letter to yourself or creating a journal where you're actually creating more empathy and understanding about your situation. So explaining reasons why, writing it down as if you're writing to a friend, a compassionate and supportive way of writing, rather than the you failed, you're a nightmare, all those kind of things that the inner critic might be saying. And also, it's also about activating a system called self-soothing. So actually doing activities which make us feel calm and warm and loved and things like that. So an example of that is visualizing a safe, nurturing space where we feel warm and welcome and accepted. And it's actually creating that as visualization and practicing that. Okay. And if it's okay with you, Ian, I just want to explain another
Yeah,
therapy.
please, please.
Thank you very much. So the final therapy I want to talk about is called EMDR. And that stands for, it's quite a long title. It stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And the way that EMDR really helps is it actually helps to process these traumatic memories that have contributed to the low self-esteem. So one way the EMDR would do this is to identify specific memories that might have affected their negative self-esteem. Say, for example, an experience in childhood where a parent was being very, very telling off or very negative, or shouting at a child, or telling the child that they're stupid. You can actually process that. By process that, it sort of takes away some of the strong feeling and the memory from that actual memory as well. And this is done by a technique called bilateral stimulation, which is moving the eyes in a certain way. And that actually helps to sort of diminish the feelings and the emotions of that particular memory. So it's actually not quite so strong in the person's mind as well. And the other thing that EMDR can do is actually, it kind of works like a U, like this. So you actually start to process the memory, so the memory gets less and gets more and more neutral. But afterwards, it can actually make you actually look at the situation in a more positive light. It can actually look at how you coped with a situation, how you can say it wasn't your fault, it doesn't define me, and then put in a positive belief about yourself. So an example would be, rather than I'm useless, you install a positive belief that I am capable. And actually, by doing a little bit of the bilateral stimulation, it reinforces this. The belief that you're capable gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So you're focusing on those memories instead. It's a very powerful therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of different strategies in there. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, Wendy. I'm wondering, in amongst all of that, if that might almost seem overwhelming to some people.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I know I've just sort of rattled through quite a lot of different strategies. So a good therapist would spend time um, deciding on the particular interventions which are best for that individual as well. And a good therapist will combine those techniques. So an example I could give you actually is so you could use cognitive behavior therapy to identify any negative thoughts, beliefs that the person has, and start to learn to challenge them. ACT can actually help to develop some strategies so that they're improving their self-esteem, like going volunteering, for example. So sort of changing some behavior to doing things which are meaningful and important to that person, or improving relationships, finding out nurturing relationships. So actually focusing on what's important to you as well. And then EMDR is, if there's a past memory, you're actually sort of processing that as well. So that will be an example of actually putting them all together. So it does depend on the individual, and it will be done sort of step by step, and making sure that the person feels right and comfortable with whatever strategies you use.
Fascinating. Thank you again, Wendy. And if people have listened to this podcast and the various approaches that are out there, and are thinking that they're ready to take that next step towards reaching out, getting professional help, should they do next?
Well, they're very welcome to contact me via my website, wendycastellino.com. And there they can just drop an email to me and ask for a conversation about whether they would like to work with me as a therapist. And there's also a free download of a self-esteem ebook on the website that they can just get some more ideas. Very simple, basic strategies that they can implement themselves. And what about you, Ian?
So people are very, very welcome to reach out and to contact Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. We regularly work with people with issues surrounding self-esteem and issues that have built up in a whole variety of different ways, some of which we've talked about today. And again, we have people within the team in a whole variety of places around the country who adopt a whole variety of different therapeutic approaches. So, as you absolutely said, it's not a one size all approach. It's very much about trying to understand the client and then putting something appropriate in place. And that's why we offer free consultations to people, so we can try to better understand their needs, and then we can talk to them about what services are available. People are very welcome to go to our website, which is www.hopeforminds.co.uk. That's www.hopeforminds.co.uk. Lots and lots of free resources on there. But if people want to book in for a completely free consultation with us where we can talk about these things, they're welcome to do that as well. So it's really just for me to thank you for everything. It's been absolutely fascinating. Lots and lots of information in there, Wendy. I'm sure people will have found it incredibly interesting. So thank you to you, and a thank you to all of our listeners today as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian.